Hi everyone, this is Dr. Giobbi, and in this lecture we're going to be discussing within the critical media theory, critical media studies tradition, we're going to be looking at rhetorical analysis. Rhetorical analysis is, I could spend a good year researching and thinking about rhetorical analysis on its own. So we're looking at chapter 5. And I'd like to firstly describe to you my introduction to rhetorical analysis. This is not something that I encountered until graduate school in psychology. And specifically, I took a course in psycholinguistics. And within psycholinguistics, like all of psychology, you have different schools of thought within research topics. So, for example, if you're looking at language and thinking, you can study that on a straightforward academic, where most academic labs are set up taking the cognitive psychology tradition towards that. You could, and there was a time that this was predominant, but now not so much so, but you could still do behavioral linguistics, how people learn language behaviorally through classical operant conditioning and what not. You could take a social psychology approach to linguistics, to language and thought. A psychoanalytic, you can take evolutionary approach. You can take an existential phenomenological approach. The approach you take depends on your interest. It depends on what calls you, what interests you. If you're interested in cognitive and neuroscientific approaches to most topics in psychology, then you will find yourself at home within an academic university department, and you will also find that you'll have many opportunities for grants and things of this nature. If you're more interested in the psychoanalytic, the existential phenomenological, the rhetorical analysis, things of this critical analysis of language and thought, you would be probably you're probably writing books and not being funded with grants from a university or from things like this, unless it's within a literature department. So you'll find a department of literature, a department of rhetoric, of cultural studies, of media studies, and that's where you'll find a lot of rhetorical analysis. But within psychology, then when I first encountered the names you're going to encounter in this book, Ferdinand de Saussure, Roland Barthes, Charles Saunders Peirce, I first encountered these individuals in psycholinguistics. And that was largely because psycholinguistics is a field that crosses over into linguistics field, and that has a lot to do with literary theory. There's a lot of literary theory. So knowing this tradition will help you to have conversations with other people, and it's just expected that you would know about this and have a background to this. Media studies, media psychology is very interdisciplinary. So this will give you a little context as to why you're not seeing a lot of statistics yet. We're doing qualitative research. And as you might not be as exposed to this within your research experience in your major of psychology, once you get into graduate school or once you read outside of a more what's the word I'm looking for? Current fads in psychology and research, and you look beyond to what would be considered the fringe or the outer circle into other departments and how they're studying phenomena, then you know about these things, you learn about these things. So with that in mind, let's take a look. I'm going to trust that if you have not read the chapter yet, you will read it after watching this video. I used to always read my chapter before going to lecture. That way the lecture made much more sense. And then I would go home and read again. So I would have, and then the chapter would make even better sense to me. Listen, some names here. The first name we're going to start out with, before we get into names, let's say what we're talking about. What is rhetoric? What is a rhetorical analysis? Rhetoric is how language, how signs, so this is symbols, logos, like the Nike swoosh or a McDonald's symbol, or letters or words or sounds, how these come to encapsulate meaning. That's it. Nice definition, actually. So there's been a history of, as you know, how words that are written, words that are heard acoustically, signs, images, films, everything is considered a text. A film is a text. A commercial is a text. A piece of music is a text. Images can be read like words. They can be read like sounds. So we read films, we read commercials, we read TV shows, and we call them texts because we're reading them like texts. I know this is probably a slightly different way of looking at things. So now that you understand this, the first figure that we really talk about in rhetoric, in rhetorical analysis at least, and realize that rhetoric goes back to the ancient Greeks. You can read in Aristotle his rhetoric, his studies on rhetoric, how things are used to persuade others, to move others emotionally, to have an effect in communication with others. So this also crosses over into communications theory, as we're going to see with Charles Saunders Peirce. The place that you usually begin in studying rhetorical analysis is with the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. And I'm going to not teach you all of Saussure. I just want to bring up one image to give you the thing to really think about with Saussure. Saussure said a lot of things. As a matter of fact, do you know all this stuff you learned in introduction class and in your cognitive psychology classes about Piaget? Piaget's idea of schemas and all that stuff? Well, Ferdinand de Saussure, who lived 100 years before Piaget, Saussure's years are 1857 to 1913, Piaget got this from Saussure. All these things about schemas and how language and thought, how we come to develop images and meaning through words and text. This comes right from Saussure. So if you ever do an in-depth study or if you ever do research on Piaget, make sure you check out the writings of Saussure, because you might teach your professor something. Okay, so this is what I'd like to really describe for you with Saussure. The thing we want to really learn from Saussure, Ferdinand de Saussure, is that words, whether it's a written word or whether it's a spoken word, are abstractions of the thing itself. So in other words, there's an illustration I like to use. You can't drink the word water. So when I say water, when I write in English, W-A-T-E-R, on a piece of paper and you look at it, it signifies something. It's a signifier of a concept, of a signified. So you have, this probably sounds like Piaget, where you see an image and then you have a schema for that image. That's Saussure. So you have the rabbit, which is the signified, and the word rabbit written down, or the word spoken rabbit in English, of course, le pain in French. You have this signifier. So you have the concept in your mind and the sound or the image. These are two different things. And you have the signified and the signifier. The signified would be the thing you see, the rabbit, or the tree here. And the signifier would be the word in French, arbre, in English, tree. Here's the tree. But the tree is an abstraction. It's something that kind of stands in for something else. So in this way, what is really important when we study Saussure is to realize in his idea of semiology that when we are talking about things, we sometimes think we're doing reality when or not we're abstracted from reality. And to get to the thing itself, projects of enlightenment and science start to fall apart because we are always communicating at an abstract level. You can't drink the word water. You can only physically, phenomenologically experience water. You can pour it on your skin, you can put it in your mouth, you can put it on your tongue, you can smell it, you can listen to it, but that is how you interact with water. The word water, my saying it or writing the word water, is not water. It's a signifier for the signified. Okay. The second step that I hope this makes sense, and I hope this also, those of you who are into things like, we're going to enter into postmodern critique of things like the Matrix and hyperreality that we talked about in the past. Now you understand where this plays into. When we talk about anything, we have to realize that we are dealing in abstractions. And as Buddhism and Hindu tradition teaches us, if you really want to get to know something, you shut up and you stop talking and you just meditate on that thing. That's the point of mindfulness. This is where Eastern philosophy really explodes into these Western theoretical concepts. I hope this makes sense to you. So we have, in essence, the idea that once we start talking about something, we've removed ourselves from it. We're distancing ourselves. And the best we can do is quietly sit with the thing and think about it. How about this? Here's an example of phenomenological experience. Instead of talking about the Mona Lisa or writing about the Mona Lisa, you look at the Mona Lisa painting and you study the facial expression and you imitate the facial expression in yourself. And then you introspect and understand the feeling that you're feeling and understand the phenomenology of this. Now, this makes a lot of empirical research, statistics folks very nervous because, my goodness, how are we going to measure that? Well, you can't measure it. This is qualitative research. Okay, so Ferdinand de Saussure, understanding that when we are talking and writing or dealing with images, magazine ads, movies, television shows, whatever it is, video games, that there is a symbolic representation taking place. The other important thing about Ferdinand Saussure with his semiology is that it's arbitrary. In other words, the word and the image are arbitrary. It's different in English, it's different in Spanish, it's different in German, and in French, in Chinese. Very interesting. We have an arbitrary association between sounds and images, between written text and mental concepts of the thing. After all, this then gets in psychoanalysis. There's an individual named Jacques Lacan, and these things really play into his psychology. Lacan said like Immanuel Kant, said we never get to the real. We never get to the thing in itself. The closest we ever get to anything is the mental representation of the thing. And so we can talk about things, we can think about things, but it's always abstracted. We're never actually dealing with the thing because it's unapproachable. It's you can't experience reality. Everything is always somewhere removed in a mental representation. As we know from individual differences, we all have unique understandings of the world. This is what Lacan refers to as the symbolic order. And for Lacan, when you go to psychoanalysis, what you come to learn is not about yourself, but where you view yourself within your own symbolic order. In other words, the question is, what reward is the person getting for driving like a race car driver down the highway, swerving in and out? What's the behaviorist asks, what's their payoff for this? The cognitive psychologist thinks, what are they thinking to make them behave this way? Psychoanalyst is trying to figure out what, and the evolutionary psychologist, how this is increasing their ability to live out a wish or to attract a mate. But for Lacan, he says the real question is, who does the person imagine is watching them? Who are they performing for? And think about this next time you're doing something. Ask yourself, who do I imagine is my audience? Who do I imagine is? Sometimes I get a chuckle because someone will be in their car, and more than just listening to the music for their enjoyment, they're playing the music so loud that it's like meant to impress others. And I wonder if they realize that most people are looking at them like entirely unimpressed, wondering why this person can't just enjoy themselves and leave other people alone. And instead of imposing, but it's almost like a showing of, look at me, and they're envisioning themselves attracting attention to themselves, etc. And this is the symbolic order. The question Lacan asks is, where do you view yourself within your organization of reality? This all comes back to these ideas of signifier and signified never being in reality, but the closest we can get is understanding in abstractions. Those abstractions are written words and spoken words. Now we extend that to images, magazine images, media images, video games, YouTube videos, movies, etc., all these things. And we can, each of those images that we read conjure up psychological, mental representations, emotional representations that make us think and feel things on different levels, consciously and unconsciously. So that is Ferdinand de Saussure. That's a very general introduction to what's relevant. The next person I want to talk to you about is Charles Saunders Peirce. Peirce is so important. Let's see if I can allow you to look at me too. Peirce is really one of those individuals that he's America's probably greatest philosopher. He was a friend and colleague of William James, America's first academic psychologist at Harvard. And his name, people often mispronounce it as Pierce. It's pronounced Peirce. And Charles Saunders Peirce was just, without Peirce, we would have no computer programming, we would have no computer logic, we would have, as a matter of fact, Peirce was the first person to show how experiments could be done in social sciences with statistical analysis. So where this tradition, Peirce, 1839 to 1914, almost contemporary with Saussure. That's interesting. I didn't realize this. I always feel that Peirce is somehow later than Saussure, but they're contemporaries. So what Peirce develops for us is not semiology, but semiotics. And semiotics is systems of knowledge Now, I'm giving you a kind of hybrid version of Peirce that was mixed with another guy named Jean-Francois Lyotard, but I think that it's going to help you to really get something important. So in systems of knowledge, I'd like you to think, those of you who have studied history of psychology with me, that is, you'll know this very well because we cover this in history of psychology in depth. Peirce outlined how we know things using a triangle. It's Peirce's semiotic triangle. So this is the way is you have an addressor and an addressee, someone who's speaking and someone who's listening. And you know, in these chains of conversation, someone speaks, someone listens, this person speaks, this person listens, so it's a back and forth here. So when I'm speaking to a listener, we're conversing, but it's not just this conversation that's going back and forth. There is an unacknowledged referent that we're talking about. Now let me give you an example of this. A referent is if I say something to you, we study this in the psychology of religion. If I'm speaking to this group of 50 students in this class, and I say a term like unequally yoked. Now, when I'm with a class, I look out in the audience, and I can see the majority of people just are like, have no idea. And then there'll be someone who gets a little smile or brightens up, and I realize, they know the referent. See, this word, unequally yoked, has specific meaning within a certain system of belief or a certain system of knowledge, of thinking. And that happens to be charismatic evangelical Christianity. So unequally yoked is an idea that if you are not in the same belief system, you're not yoked is when the two horse or two oxen are yoked, bound together to pull a trailer. What do you call these things? A carriage or whatever it's called? A wagon. That's it. A wagon. And if they're not equally yoked, one is not in step with the other. And this is a concept in evangelical Christianity. That means, in other words, if you're going to get married, if you're going to be yoked together, you should be on the same belief system. Okay. So there's an example of I'm saying something, and I'm using code words, unequally yoked. Another would be dead church. This is what an evangelical, in the psychology of religion, evangelical idea of, say, like a traditional Protestant or Catholic church where there's solemnity and solemnness and quiet and calmness. This is interpreted as non-exuberant. Charismatic is dancing and clapping and, getting emotionally involved with things in an exuberant way. So this code word dead church is pointing to a referent. Now, I hope that you're digging how important this is. Let's apply this to more of something you know from psychology. I'm going to say some code words. You tell me the referent in psychology. Code word. Operant conditioning. Reward and punishment schedule. Spontaneous recovery. Extinction. Okay, those are the code words. What's the referent? Behaviorism. Right. If we're talking addressor, addressee, I'm using these words, and we are unspoken referent. The thing that we're referring to is the framework of behaviorism. We're saying we're understanding the world in behaviorism. How about this? Dream analysis, repression, unconscious, reaction formation, Oedipal complex. That's right. They're code words for the psychoanalytic reference. You know that if I'm using these terms, I'm coming from a system of psychoanalysis. So the interesting thing, what if I, instead of saying unconscious, what if I say implicit memory? That's cognitive word for the same thing as the Freudian unconscious. So now I've code switch to cognitive psychology, right? If I start talking about reuptake and neurotransmitters, my referent is biological neuroscience, right? The interesting thing is that Peirce, and then later Lyotard explains to us, and very importantly, a guy named Ludwig Wittgenstein, is that when we come together to have conversation, when we're talking with one another, we are playing a game. And it's not a game like, ha, isn't this fun? That's not the game. The game is, games have rules. Games have structured rules. Monopoly has a set of rules. And to play the game of Monopoly, you have to follow the rules. Otherwise, it collapses, it falls apart. To play the game of Scrabble, you have rules that you have to follow. To play certain card games, you have certain rules that structure the game. And for Peirce, Wittgenstein, and Wittgenstein is not mentioned here, but for Peirce and Wittgenstein and Jean-Francois Lyotard, these are all names that you'll learn more about if you pursue these studies, this line of thinking. You have rules of the game are the game is the referent, and the rules of the game are the code. So if one person, so here's an example where games collapse, now conversations break down. And why do they break down? Well, they break down because an addresser might be using one referent and addressee another referent. One's playing the game of Monopoly, the other one's playing the game of Scrabble. And they show up and they say, let's play. And one's getting out the Scrabble board and the other's getting out the Monopoly board. And one's putting their shoe in the double space and the other's putting a letter on boardwalk, and it just collapses. They're saying, what are you doing? You can't do that. But you can't do that. That doesn't count in this breaking the rules. But they're both playing by different rules, different structures, different systems of knowledge. I hope you see how this is affecting. What if you show up and you're having a conversation between a creationist and an evolutionist? One's playing by the game, by the rules of evolutionary biology. The other's playing by the rules of some theology, some belief system. Who's right and who's wrong? Well, that depends which belief system which system of knowledge you're in. If you're critiquing one system of knowledge with another, the game breaks down. Do you dig what this is saying? This is why very little happens in conversation when you're trying to have a conversation and you're staying within one system of knowledge. To actually have a conversation about two different knowledge systems, you have to step back from both of those knowledge systems, or as Lyotard tells us, you actually have to suspend your own position and fully embrace the others to understand it, and then go back to yours to integrate these two. And this is so difficult. This takes a great deal of intellectual and emotional and personal fortitude. Why? Because when we temporarily step away from how we view the world, that is like schizophrenia. That's like abandoning ourselves. I mean, our knowledge systems, how we feel safe and have identity and who we are, and all of these things. This is what I want you to know about Charles Saunders Peirce. And I hope that this blows your mind as much as it did and continues to blow my mind every time I think of it. The next name we want to talk about is Roland Barthes. Let me see, I'll pull up. Barthes is known for a great book that are like essays. It's called Mythologies. We'll get a look at that book cover. This is the edition I have. Mythologies. This is mine's an orange cover, like was in that. There it is. That's the edition I have. And Mythologies is something we're going to study here in this lecture, and I'm going to pull up if you look on your page 127, you'll see the image that you're seeing here, and this is taken from Roland Barthes' book Rhetoric of the Image, and where in one of his descriptions of his rhetorical analyses of an advertisement, it's a French advertisement for Italian pasta. Well, it's an advertisement that appeared in Europe for an Italian pasta manufacturer, Panzani. And this essay describes what's happening in this image, in terms of reading it like a text. So I'm going to spell this out for you in a systematic way. The first thing to realize about Roland Barthes is a text is not just words, it's anything that is a symbol that signifies meaning. So we have a picture here, and we can read this picture as a text. And that is what happens in this short essay that we're going to look at. Roland Barthes distinguishes between two types of texts, writerly and readerly. Now, we can think of movies, we can think of television shows, YouTube videos, instructions that come from the box and the IKEA package, poetry, literature, music, readerly texts and writerly texts. Readerly text is straightforward, one meaning. When you have the instructions that come from IKEA on how to assemble the chair, that's a readerly text. There's not a lot of interpretation. You can't, like, most people aren't going to sit down and have different interpretations of an IKEA instruction manual. It's step 1, step 2, step 3. It's not like someone thinks there's like symbolic metaphor and other rhetorical devices going on, metonymy and stuff like this. It's just, it is what it is. It's literal. It denotes something. Straightforward. When it says insert screw A into hole B, there's no interpretation. That literally screw A denotes that screw, the picture image that you see in the thing, and you put it in there, right? And okay, so that's a readerly text. A writerly text is one that is takes interpretation, hermeneutic interpretation. Now, for me, the most, and where rhetorical analysis really feels very similar to me, like dream analysis. In dream analysis, we don't read or we don't think about our dreams literally. We read our dreams like a poem, like a metaphor. A dream is a metaphor that is standing in for something psychical. You pay attention to the emotionality, the emotional consequences of things in the dream, not the literal dream itself. No one cares about the literal dream. That's not interesting. What's interesting is when you take the literal story, you start comparing it to your real life, what's going on, and you start examining how you emotionally experience and the emotions that are experienced at different parts of the literal story, and that's how you get down to the connotated, the metaphorical, the deeper meaning of what's going on here being communicated. This is one of the things when, silly amateurs who go to wherever they go and they get a book on dream analysis, and it says if you dream this, this is what it means. If you dream this, this is silly. No one has the same experience of a dream this way. Our dreams are personal. You have to look at the dream personally. No book is going to tell you how to They tell you what your dream means. You will find theorists who will teach you how to go about figuring out what your dream means, but not literally, right? This is too simplistic. So Barth is telling us that we have readerly texts and writerly texts. If you are familiar with the films of Federico Fellini, that's a writerly text. If you're familiar with the films of Lars von Trier or the Pulp Fiction, Quentin Tarantino, these are writerly texts. There's a lot of room for interpretation. It's not a film about safety or something where there's just one interpretation. This is a film that is filled with metaphor, filled with unanswered questions. It's what makes a great film is when you leave it and you say, huh, and you spend the next 20 years thinking about what this was all about, what this even meant, like a dream. That's one first. I think that's a great entryway to first thing that Barth had to talk about. Number one, where texts are not just words and sounds, they're also images and moving images, videos, music too. Number two, we have readerly and writerly texts. Some texts are literal, others are highly metaphorical. Some of those texts, we make a distinction. Next, Barth makes a distinction between denotation and connotation. Denotation is what the kind of a denotative, here we are. Here's a denotation would be looking at this image and saying, okay, we have a bag, and we have a bag of cheese, and we have a bag of pasta, we have a tomato, we have a mushroom, we have onions, we have a can of, I guess that's crushed or tomato paste, or crushed tomatoes, probably tomato paste. We have a pepper back here. We have a red background. That's denotation. Connotative analysis is not just looking at this advertisement showing us pasta, but looking at the symbolic imagery that the image connotates. For example, this is an ad that primarily was running in France, to my recollection. Look at the color scheme. Red, white, green. What is that? What is the symbolic representation? Now, if you're like me and you're an Italian American, or maybe you're Italian, if you grew up, you know red, white, and green has a connotation, right? It's not just red, white, and green. Red, white, and green for an Italian is like red, white, and blue for an American, or red, white, and blue for a Frenchman. We have red, white, and green is connotating. It's a connotation of Italianness. Now, there's a certain image that you all get in your minds when you think of Italianness. There's an Italian phenomenology. There's some kind of emotional, symbolic feeling that most people get when they think of Italy. I don't know what. I'll go out on a limb, and of course I might be biased because I grew up in this tradition, but for Italian has a lot to do with the blood, with romance, with passion. Look at this, red tomatoes. My father grows 40 tomato plants a year. Now, one plant gets 20 tomatoes. This is just, he eats them like apples. This is Italianness. One season, late August, he's in the kitchen biting into a tomato that he grew on his vine. He grew the plant from a seed he nursed it all the way to the final, and he's eating the tomato. And I hear him say, boy, it's a pity when an Italian dies during tomato season. This is the kind of blood of Italianness. You all within your individual cultural ways of being. When I say blood, I mean passion. I don't mean genetics. It has nothing to do with genetics. any genetics grows up in a certain social situation, and they pick up these culturally charged ways of being. Italianness, Irishness. Irishness. It's another example. But in Italianness, we have these music and opera and drama and romance and passion and art and beauty, and back to Etruscan and Roman times. And um, there's a certain something phenomenology that is encapsulated by these colors. So we're not just talking about red, white, and green color scheme. We're talking about a connotative conjuring up of a symbolism. When I was growing up, there was a television program called Miami Vice. And this is a favorite topic of many media theorists to talk about Miami Vice. Because Miami Vice wasn't so interesting about the plot lines. The script and the plot lines are not that great. But what is great about the show is the aesthetics and the music. There was a guy named Jan Hammer, and he used all synthesizers in his house and composed all the music that was featured, original music that was featured for the show. The show, when it was conceptualized, wanted to be, MTV first came out at the same time. MTV was all about music and imagery coming together, music videos. Suddenly people are sitting and watching music videos. As your parents probably have told you, when we were growing up, MTV was music videos. There weren't shows on. It was just music and videos. And the videos had this, added this emotional dimension to the music that was really interesting. They were like short films with a soundtrack. Well, when the designers of Miami Vice, the producer, the writers at Miami Vice, conceptualized the show, they said, we want a cop show that's in MTV style. So they would have all the great pop songs, the famous Phil Collins, I Can Feel It Coming in the Air Tonight, and the scene with them driving in the Ferrari, that's from the pilot, where you get this music video feel. This was an weekly hour episode. The colors had no earth tones. There were no earth tones in Miami Vice. There were no reds, whites, and greens. If there was red, it was bright, intense red. It was muted pastels, this whites and pastel teal, pastel blue or pink, these colors, and this look that Don Johnson had at the time, this Miami pastels. This was all part of it. The show was mostly filmed at night, so you had a lot of dramatic shadows. So you watch the show, not so much for the storyline, but for the connotation of the imagery, the cinematography, the music, you kind of feel the Miami Vice episode. Now, if you're interested in understanding this, look at Miami Vice. Watch the you can watch it on Amazon. Watch the what do you call that one? The first one, the pilot of Miami Vice, and then I want you to put into the Amazon viewer Peter Gunn, and watch the first episode of Peter Gunn. Peter Gunn is the 1950s version of Miami Vice. Instead of the rock and roll MTV, or instead of the Jan Hammer synthesizer music, you have jazz. Henry Mancini composed a few jazz standards that appeared on the show that became standards in jazz. Dreamsville and the Peter Gunn theme. It's film noir, it's black and white, it's harsh shadows and light. Now, the interesting thing about Peter Gunn is the characters in Peter Gunn are incredible. There's like this whole other, they're very interesting characters that you just want to know more about. It's interesting to watch an episode of the phenomenology, the connotation, the kind of Barthian experience the readerliness of Miami Vice and then the readerly text of Peter Gunn. Both of these shows are not denotative readerly text. They're both writerly texts. I think I just accidentally said readerly, but I meant writerly. You watch them and you interpret, you think, you put pieces together. Very interesting. I will never forget my first experience with the film Pulp Fiction. Went to Pulp Fiction. It was the first film I ever saw at the newly built Sony IMAX theater in Lincoln Center, by Lincoln Center in New York. And I was living in New York at the time, and I went in and I watched the film and I left it. My world was turned upside down. What had I just seen? What just happened? I had a similar feeling when I watched Fellini's 8.5 for the first time. And I came to study it for the next 30 years through a Jungian perspective. But these are all readerly films. You don't leave this film saying this is what happened and this is what happened and this is what happened. You leave this film putting pieces together and interpreting and understanding and going back and having conversations. What do you think's in the briefcase? And having conversation, writing academic articles and understanding the connotation of the text. Okay, so further looking at this, look at this bag. What is this? This is an Italian shopping bag. There's something else denotative. It's an Italian shopping bag. If you're like we have our canvas bags here. In Italy, they have these net bags. They have canvas bags too, but a lot of people use these net bags. And what does it represent? What does it look like? It looks like a fishing net. It looks like you're harvesting something from the sea. If there's something connotative about this, a fishing net. And you have all these organic, a mushroom. You can't get more organic, more earthy than a mushroom. And you have the tomato and the onion and the pepper. These are all organic things. And this is interesting. If you look at this cheese, it's in a bag. That's very un-Italian, because in Italy, cheese is a living thing. Cheese isn't something you seal up in a bag. It's something that sits out and you eat at room temperature, and it's aged. In America, we seal everything up and plow our cheese up in plastic and put it in the morgue, the refrigerator, because it's something dead. So this is an idea of all that, this simple image, this one little image here, an ad can be read connotatively. Let me look here. Where's our friend? Okay. So I am going to I was going to read through this with you. What should I do? Should I read through this with you, or should we take a look at Alyssa Milano and her condoms and do a rhetorical analysis of the Candies ad? Let's read through this together. Here we have a Panzani advertisement, some packs of pasta, a tin, a sachet, some tomatoes, onions, peppers, a mushroom, all emerging from a half-open string bag in yellows and greens on a red background. Let us try to skim off the different messages it contains. Now this is from Roland Barthes' Rhetoric of the Image. Qualitative research. You're not going to find statistics here. This is talking about things. The image immediately yields a first message whose substance is linguistic. Its supports are the caption with its marginal and the labels, these being inserted into the natural disposition of the scene on a beam. My French could be off. I don't know how that Y is pronounced. Abim, I think. The code from which this message has been taken is none other than that of the French language. The only knowledge required to decipher it is a knowledge of writing and of French. In fact, the message can itself be further broken down from the sign Panzani gives, not simply the name of the firm, but also by its assonance, an additional signified, that of Italianicity. We talked about this. The linguistic message is therefore twofold, at least in its particular image, denotational and connotational. Since, however, we have here only a single typical sign, namely that of articulated written language, it will be counted as one message. Putting aside the linguistic message, we are left with the pure image, even if the labels are part of it. So he's talking about the linguistic presence, the words that are on the label of the pasta, even if the labels are part of it anecdotally. Now we just want to look at the image itself. The image straight away provides a series of discontinuous signs. First, the order is unimportant as these signs are not linear. This isn't a storyline. This is something that comes all at once, and that's what makes it readerly. Writerly. If it were readerly, it would go in a this and then this and then this, like an instruction manual. Instead, you're just given this cornucopia of stuff. It's unimportant. The signs are not linear. The idea that we have in the scene represented is a return from the market. I'm sorry I'm so choppy. I have trouble reading out loud from the computer screen. I guess my eyes are getting bad. A signified, which itself implies two euphoric values, that of the freshness of the products and of the essentially domestic preparation for which they are destined. This is going to someone's kitchen at home to be home cooked. Mom and grandma. Oh, I remember my grandmother's pasta fagioli. I go to restaurants, I ask for it, nothing like it. I follow her recipe, and then I get close to it. To read its signifier is the half-open bag which lets the provisions spill out onto the table, unpacked. To read the first sign requires only a knowledge which is in some sort implanted as part of the habits of a very widespread culture where shopping around for oneself is opposed to the hasty stocking up preserves refrigerators of a more mechanical civilization. This is when we think of an Italian culture. There aren't big refrigerators waiting with frozen foods. Everything's kind of right out of the garden, fresh and prepared for that day. The bread is stale by the next morning. It doesn't last a week. You go to the bakery every day. A second sign is more or less equally evident. Its signifier is the bringing together of the tomato, the pepper, the tricolored hues, yellow, green, red, of the poster. It is signified as Italy, or rather Italianicity. The Italian assonance of the name Panzani and the knowledge it draws upon is already more particular. It is a specifically French knowledge. An Italian would barely perceive the connotation of the name, no more probably than he would the Italianicity of the tomato and the pepper, because they're in that culture. So this is an ad that was, this ad takes on a different meaning in France than it would in Italy, is what they're saying. And the ad was intended for France, like I told you. Based on a familiarity with certain tourist stereotypes. And of course, not all Italians fit the stereotypes that I said. Continuing to explore the image, which is not to say that it is not entirely clear at first glance, there is no difficulty in discovering at least two other signs. In the first, this serried collection of different objects transmits the idea of a total culinary service, and on one hand, though Panzani furnished everything necessary for a carefully balanced dish, and on the other, as though the concentrate is in the tin. The concentrate in the tin were equivalent to the natural produce surrounding it. So this is the idea of clusters in your textbook. These fresh ingredients, the peppers, the tomatoes, connected with sitting the cans resting on those, it has a connotation that what's in that can is somehow connected to that fresh, out of the garden contents. That's the connotation. We can finish this. Composition of the image, evoking the memory of innumerable alimentary paintings. So this is like a still life, this ad. It's like a work by a Renaissance artist. It's a still life, a painting. It sends us to an aesthetic signified, the nature mort, or as is better expressed in other language, the still life. The knowledge on which this sign depends is heavily cultural. It might be suggested that in addition to these 4 signs, there is a further information pointer, that which tells us that in the advertisement and which arises from both place and image in the magazine from the emphasis of the labels, not to mention the caption. The last information, however, is coextensive with the scene. It eludes signification insofar as the advertising nature of the image is essentially functional. To utter something is not necessarily to declare I am speaking, except in a deliberately reflexive system such as literature. I'm going to skip to the end. In our reading, if our reading is satisfactory, the photograph analyzed offers us 3 messages: a linguistic content, that's the one on the label, a coded iconic message, a non-coded iconic message. Successively, then, we shall look at the linguistic message, the denoted image, in the connotated image. So this is, I hope that this gives you an appreciation for how to do a rhetorical analysis. You're going to look and see in your text on the previous page, there was the great rhetorical analysis, or the next page, of the famous Candy's perfume ad, where Alyssa Milano is looking. You can see her, she was on Who's the Boss as a little child, and now she's no longer a little child here. She's looking in the mirror with seduction, and she has the Candy's perfume, and what else is in this? Clustered around all the condoms. And this is the promise, the clustered association between sexual desire and getting all the sex you want because of this perfume. It's linking it together. What's missing? And it's all this sterile, white, clean, everything's very antiseptic and clean, and sexual desire and condoms and perfume all clustered together. And of course, as they give an analysis here, which is really great, I like one of the best parts they mention in the text is that what you don't see in the medicine cabinet is things they don't want you to cluster and associate with their perfume, such as the ointments for the skin rashes and stuff that you'll get from that kind of excessive behavior. Okay, that is rhetorical analysis. It's just whetting your appetite. It's just turning you on to what exists. Saussure, Peirce, Barthes, narratology. Remember, this gets even into music. When you go to music school, you learn to compose. Like if you want to write a song, when you're dealing, instrumental music has no words. People talk about songwriting, they're often talking about lyric writing. That's different than songwriting. Music is composition. A piece of music, if you want to write a piece of music for emotional expression, you write a piece of music. There are no rules with it. But you learn rules if you want to write music that, becomes a bestseller, makes you money, a Marxist critique. And to do that, what sells, or what sells in a movie, is a form, a certain format. And just like you'll see the movie trailer, all the movie trailers, all the pop songs have a format. You've heard it before. It's the same song over and over again. What has changed? The lyrics have changed, the chord progressions have changed, but the format is all the same. We we like things that we are familiar with. It's just different enough to seem like it's not familiar, but that's the denoted level. If you look at the connotated level, you see, well, this is all the same song. It's all the same form. It's all saying the same thing. In college, you listen to college radio stations, and you'll get turned on to music that breaks the form. It breaks the narrative forms, and some people say, oh, I don't like that. Something sounds wrong with it. And other people get turned on by it simply because it's not sounding like everything else. Okay, enjoy this topic. I hope you got something out of this.